I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined by Blake Fleming of Dazzling Killmen, solo artist, author of the Book of Rhythm, and also involved with a variety of different projects, including the Mars Volta. Too many projects for us to talk about in one interview, but we're focused on the Dazzling Killmen specifically because SKiN GRAFT Records is just about to issue a new remastered version of the band's long out of print debut, Dig Out the Switch, which in fact was co-remastered by Blake Fleming. And that is out on September the 12th. And in terms of like a little bit of backstory for this episode, so I can direct you towards the Every Album Ever podcast, episode 201, their Dazzling Killmen episode, if you're interested in getting some other insights about the band and their history. I, in fact, got some interview content from Nick Sakes and from Mark at SKiN GRAFT Records, which got fed into that episode. And then, in fact, I interviewed Nick for this podcast, episode 36, where, in fact, we focused on Upright Forms, his current band. Well, Dazzling Killmen is also now his current band, but his other current band, Upright Forms, and basically his musical history post Dazzling Killmen. So if you're interested in that part of the musical journey, I can suggest that you go there. And in this particular conversation with Blake, we are going right back into the origins of Dazzling Killmen, and particularly focusing on the time around Dig Out the Switch, the making of it, and then how it came about that they got back together, because the band is going to be on tour very soon. I will put various links and information into the description. You can go to blakethedrummer.com for various links, information, and content. You can check out the Dazzling Killmen on Instagram and Facebook. You can go to Bandcamp to pre-order the newly remastered Dig Out the Switch through SKiN GRAFT Records. And I believe that is about it. You can follow me on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, to check out what I'm doing with my own music. And one other thing I suppose worth mentioning is that episode 100 of Whatever Comes Next is coming around the corner. And I have got some exciting things going on for that episode, so stay tuned for that. Some very cool guests, all in one episode. And I'm going to play a track from the newly remastered Dig Out the Switch at the end of this conversation with a little clip in just a moment. And so with all of that being said, Blake Fleming of Dazzling Killmen, take it away. Hello, Blake.
Hi, Tom.
Nice to meet you in real time.
Yes, yeah, likewise.
So the first thing that I notice is that you have various different drums and other equipment stacked up behind you. So whereabouts are you right now?
Yeah, I'm in my little drum studio room here in my house. I got a kit there and some stuff, kind of stored away. And this is like let me turn on some more light. I have a lot more equipment than this, but I can only keep so much in my house. A friend of mine has a recording studio down the road, and I have a lot of things there, a vibraphone and like a timpani and more drums and like a big PA system and stuff. And depending on what I'm doing, but yeah, I have this extra bedroom in our 3-bedroom house that we rent here, and it works out pretty well. There's a nice garage in the backyard. It's a stone freestanding building. So it's kind of cool, and I'm hoping to eventually turn that into my own studio. It shouldn't take a ton of money, but it's still, something for a little bit further down the road. But eventually I want to give this room to my son as he's getting bigger, because it's got like its own bathroom and stuff too, which is kind of cool. And then I'll move this whole production out to the garage eventually.
And has he followed in your footsteps in terms of being a musician?
No, not exactly. I mean, he loves music. He is a huge fan of music, and he's got a lot of talent when it comes to music. He does play the piano and he plays the drums, but it hasn't kind of hooked him the way that it did me when I was younger, which it doesn't have to. Not expecting that, but whenever we do get to play together at times, it's really fun. And me and his mom, I mean, we just want him to have a good, well-balanced education in general, and music is just a huge, huge part of that, whether you come from a family of musicians or not. My wife is the same way. She's super musical, but she doesn't really play a specific instrument. She can play the piano some. She played the clarinet, when she was a kid. But like the love of music is the thing that definitely is one of the big things that rules the house. There's always music playing in the house, always, like whether it be me playing the stereo or now that my son's like almost 13, like he's walking around like with his headphones on, he's like, insular now, I gotta like get him to pull those off sometimes and like hear what's going on in the house too, but yeah, music is paramount for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that in terms of growing up in a household where one way or another music was just sort of embedded in so many different things. Like my dad was always involved in music in one way or another, whether he was singing in a choir or he was I think it was the oboe that he played rather than the clarinet. For some reason, even though I understand that oboe and clarinet are quite different, I somehow keep getting them
Yeah.
confused in my head.
The shape and look is very similar, but the mouthpiece is totally different. The oboe, you've got the little reed, and then the clarinet, you have a reed as well, but you got a very different sort of mouthpiece. I don't know all the details, but but yeah, just upon first glance, the shape of it, like it's a black tubular thing with like silver little keys on it, and they look very similar.
Yeah. Now, Blake, there are far too many things in your career in music that we can cover in one interview, but there are a variety of things that I want to get to. And one of the main things to talk about, one of the main reasons why we're here is because of the forthcoming remastered reissue of Dig Out the Switch, the first album by Dazzling Killmen, which is going to be coming out on the 12th of September on SKiN GRAFT Records. So thinking about SKiN GRAFT and thinking about Dazzling Killmen. So I know that originally the album came out on a different label, on a French label, but I understand that the label and Dazzling Killmen are sort of inexorably linked in terms of their origins. And I think it was on the split with Mother's Day, that 7-inch, that was the first release that you had, and that was the first SKiN GRAFT release. So what do you remember about that, and how did that come together?
The exact details of that for me are kind of foggy, because I think at that point, I was sort of the runty kid of the band when we were starting off as a 3-piece, and Nick and Darren, being older and more experienced, were talking to people that were going to be putting things out. I was usually relayed information, after the fact or whatever, or not that I wasn't included in the conversation, but I wasn't, there in those initial conversations. So I remember that we had this song Killing Fever kind of floating around that we had been working on, and we weren't sure what to do with it. We weren't sure if it was going to go on the eventual, first record. I think after a while we thought that it maybe wasn't fitting in with the rest of the material in a way that we were working on, but that we still liked it. So I think it made it an easy candidate to just, put it out as a single. And, we had heard about Mark and Rob from SKiN GRAFT, at least because of their comics initially, and were coming to some of our early shows, and we had seen some of the comics and some of their artwork, and they were like these like total punk rock guys into underground music and underground comics and that sort of thing, and it there was an appeal there. So I think we were just, let's give this a go. It was somebody else to put out something else by us, and then I don't think we expected it to necessarily turn into what it did. I'm sure, maybe Mark Fisher had the vision back then already, but I mean, my God, there's like, over 150 releases, 170. I can't remember what catalog number they're on. What we have to look and see what Dig Out the Switch is. I can't remember what it is now. But almost 200 releases later, that label is still going and thriving. And so that initial little split turned into a lot more than we initially thought it would, but as far as like us coming together with those guys, it was just sort of like they were floating around our shows from what I remember, and we would hang out and talk, and I was like, oh, those guys are pretty cool. They're interested in us. They put out this like zine, or they put out these comics, sort of thing. And cool, they want to do this. I think the one thing that I will say about that initial 7-inch is the artwork and the what that sort of depicts on the Killmen side was something that it had been created, and it was too late for us to go, we don't really like that. We don't really like what this conveys. But that was always the feeling in that band, was like, wait a second, like we kind of get what you guys are going for, but this is a whole like other weird, like it's kind of rapey or something. Like that is not, that is not something we wanted to be associated with. So, there was a little bit of a bump there, but, and I don't think that was necessarily, it was no ill intent on anyone's part, in the creators, but, we were all crossing some lines in certain ways back then. I mean, everybody was into, watching Al Dwyer, like, or what was that his name? Bud Dwyer, not Al Dwyer, Bud Dwyer, like blow his head off or something, or like you're into like Joel Peter Witkin, photography, or things that are more macabre in a way. It was partly the time and partly our age.
And in terms of the identity of the band in those early periods, I initially did a sort of interview with Mark and with Nick Sykes via email for another podcast that I do research for and sometimes interviews, called Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex. And they did an episode on Dazzling Killmen. And one of the things that Mark mentioned was that from his point of view, when he saw you guys playing live for the first time, he said that, compared to a lot of other bands he would see, he felt like you guys were sort of fully formed in terms of the unit that you were. Like he said, that you evolved through the relatively short lifespan of the band. But I'm kind of curious, from your point of view, how did you see the kind of that initial period of you getting together, the three of you, and like kind of getting your musical identity?
It was very exciting, just to put it really plainly, because there was an obvious energy and chemistry going on between the three of us from the very first time that we played all together in one room. It was, I mean, we really all looked up from our instruments in the midst of playing with this like, holy shit kind of look, like what's happening right here? What we just unleash, It was that real. I mean, it was very like, it was profound. It was an undeniable force, So, and I mean, man, I was a kid, I mean, when we got in that room that first time, I was 16. I don't think I had turned 17 yet. I turned 17 that fall, but I was 16 years old. I mean, that was amazing for me. I had played in fifing and drumming corps. I had been in a Scottish bagpipe band. I had played in like the school marching band, the jazz band, concert band.
So when you said that, when you said that you'd been in a Scottish bagpipe band, you were playing the bagpipes?
I was playing Scottish snare drum, actually.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, which is like a whole really cool, very, very jazzy, syncopated style of playing. Yeah, the drums are really interesting. They've got two sets of snares on them. You have snares on the bottom head, which is traditional, but you have snares underneath the top head as well, which makes it this really crazy, brittly, metallic-y, extra crispy sort of sound. And it's got this like it's really jazzy, a lot of buzz rolls and syncopated rhythm. So I totally gravitated to that. And that was, I was like 14, 15 years old. But yeah, I played drums in that as well. So, I had a lot of experience, but I had never been in like, besides being, jamming with some friends and doing covers, I'd never been in a rock band yet that was creating its own original music. And not only that, but music that had such weight to it, I just happened to be really lucky that, it all started because I met Darren. Darren and I met each other playing in a community college jazz band. Darren was taking some classes there. I think he was 21. I was still in high school, but I had been asked to play in the jazz band by the director, who also directed the high school jazz band. So I was 15 at the time. I think there's 6 years between me and Darren, and there's 10 between me and Nick. So it really was like, I kind of all of a sudden like had these like older brothers in a way that were from this world that I knew just a little bit about. Like I had a couple older brothers like in my actual like real life, like blood brothers that turned me on to a lot of music as well. But it was really like going to school, when I started hanging out with Nick and Darren both. Like they were so full of information that I wasn't aware of at that time, and being like 15, 16, 17, oh my God, it was all so exciting. And I ate up as much as I could, yeah.
I'm quite fascinated by the dynamic between the three of you. And very early on, just minutes ago, you said that you were kind of the runt. You considered yourself to be the runt of the band, and like obviously you were several years younger than them. I don't want to misrepresent what Nick said, but I kind of got the impression from his recollections of you coming into the band. I don't necessarily want to say that he was intimidated, but he kind of felt that you had this quite high level expertise as a drummer, whereas he perhaps felt that he was more kind of like rudimentary as a guitar player. So I'm wondering for you, how did you sort of feel about all those dynamics in terms of like, obviously there was the age, but then in terms of how much experience you had like as a trained musician, how did that all kind of fit together?
Yeah. I didn't really think about it like initially at that time as far as like, going, oh, I have so much more musical experience on an instrument than this other person does. It just was, I didn't look at it that way. I didn't judge Nick in that way. I just saw that like he had some songs that he showed me, and I was like, oh, cool, and then Darren would play the bass line, and I was like, oh crap. And then I fell in, and it was very organic, I think that the differences in our backgrounds like that's definitely one thing that led to the music starting to stand out a little bit or become sort of special in a way, because it carried attention with it from the get-go. Age, personality, experience, all of that, played into each one of us kind of becoming the component that we did within the group. Like that dynamic was essential, because if it wasn't there, it would have been a different band. Obviously it was essential because that's what helped create, the music that came, but yeah, I definitely didn't look at it in a judgmental way. It was more like I had been shown something that it was kind of like, like I learned to ride a motorcycle really, really fast all of a sudden. And I'm, holy shit, look at me. I'm on a motorcycle all of a sudden. And I'm going like 70 miles an hour down this fucking country road. And I'm like, hold on. I can kind of control it, but it's like, it's just at any moment it could get completely out of my hands and crash and burn. And we kept things kind of on that edge, because that's one thing I mentioned in other interviews before is we were all playing kind of at the apex of our abilities, in order to make that music happen, and sometimes it really was like, whoa, like this is, I'm sitting here playing the bass, but I don't mean that for Darren. I was more like, I hope, I hope I can stay on this horse,
Yeah. And getting into Dig Out the Switch and a little bit beyond. So you worked with Steve Albini on the record. And then I think ultimately, I'm not quite sure if you had 2 or 3 different recording sessions that you did with him, with Dazzling Killmen.
We did multiple recording sessions with Steve, but for Dig Out the Switch, it was, we went up, we played the record, we mixed it, and we drove home.
Yeah.
24 hours in, out, done. Here's the whole record. It comes out on cassette. It doesn't come out on cassette. We get a cassette instead of like a CD copy of it. We had a cassette. We were listening to it on the van in the van on the way home, and I cannot even remember if we even finished the whole thing before Darren chucked it out the window.
That was a thing that Nick said to me. He said that he wasn't really very happy with how it sounded. So I was curious to know from your perspective how you remember that impression from hearing the final product of what you'd done together with Albini.
Yeah,
and Jeff Tweedy as well, obviously, because he was there too.
I just mean that Jeff was there in a way to kind of hold our hands. We just needed some sort of security blanket, and he was a friend that just happened to been into a studio like a few more times, previous, but he was still a kid and new and coming up, even though he was becoming popular in the indie world. Uncle Tupelo were definitely indie darlings at that point. It's just funny that I don't know, because Jeff has never even come forward at all to say anything about this record, I think, since then, and now that it's being reissued, like he's, I guess, kind of stayed quiet. I don't even know if he knows anything about it, but I certainly wonder what he would say as far as what his role was. He was more just a friend of ours that was there to be supportive, I think to say that he produced it was just us like, hey, yeah, Jeff produced it. It looked good,
Yeah.
But
okay, that's fair enough. So what about in terms of like what you remember about that recording session, and then also how you felt about the final album at the end?
So, we drove up, we set up, we played everything, we mixed it. My grandfather had died like a day or two before that. I think I found out when I was like maybe driving up. I don't remember. It was really kind of sudden. So after all the recording, we ended up driving back home at night, overnight, because I had to be a pallbearer the next morning. So we were all like really pretty delirious, like slap happy, delirious, kind of happy, sad, like, you're kind of laughing and crying sort of thing. Right. And, there were moments when we felt, I think, proud that we had just even made it that far. Like, hey, we actually made a record. We went to Steve Albini's, like, we were just we were just no one. We were just some kids from the Midwest in a way, who grew up listening to this stuff and like had these heroes. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, we got to work with one. And so we were kind of like, wow, kind of proud of ourselves in one way. But then the very next second, it would just be like crushing disappointment, because it was like, we would just hear all these mistakes and all these things we wanted to do differently that we could have done better, but it was too late. Here it was. And all the buildup, all the effort, all the blood, sweat, and tears, all the practice and all that. And then all of a sudden we had this kind of shitty sounding cassette that we're not super happy with. And that whole very quiet moment of just eject, no words, just because you had to crank the window. That was like that silent moment there spoke all the words, for all of us. And it's still to this day, because I wrote about it briefly for, I guess, about the reissue, this moment. And it was like really one of the more powerful moments that I remember about all of Dazzling Killmen, And it was a really, really depressing moment, and then we just kind of rode home in kind of depressive, quiet silence, Yeah.
And so from that experience, then fast forwarding all the way through to now with the forthcoming remastered reissue, I understand that you co-remastered the record. So
Yeah.
tell me about how this new version of the album came about.
Well, I mean, Dig Out the Switch has been virtually unavailable for 30 years. It appeared on YouTube at one point. Somebody uploaded it to there and you could listen through it. Otherwise, it was on no streaming services, and the record had sold out long ago, and would go for sometimes $200-$300 on Discogs. That kind of thing. It was a very collector's, worthy sort of piece. So it needed to get reissued just because of scarcity, and at least in that very first side of the album, I believe that to be one of the more profound statements of the early 90s. That first side of Dig Out the Switch, I am very, very proud of. It is a huge statement of like, who the fuck is this? What is this? Who is it? Like, what are all these influences? Like, what? Like, who? Wow. What are these guys listening to? What, it's enigmatic in a way, but it's also very direct and in your face. And I think it's quite a statement. That right there made it worthy for me for it to be reissued. Mark from SKiN GRAFT felt the same way. And it just kind of helps complete the story. That first side, I'll stand by. The second side of the record, two of the songs we had released previously as singles. I think the singles versions were probably better. And the last song on the record, Code Blue, that's a good one, I think, still. I would have taken Go Slim and Numb off, and we had actually talked about doing a truncated version, but we were just gonna stay true to history and just reissue it as it was. Okay, but that first side is quite a statement. The record never sounded great. We loved Steve, we loved working with Steve, but at that point, Steve would have 30 feet of fax every day waiting for him, at the end of sessions. And there was like a red light bulb that lit up when the phone would ring. So it wouldn't, because the ringer was off, but he could see. And the fucking thing was just like kind of red all the fuck. I mean, it was just like, he was the man, I mean, this is early 90s, he just got done doing like PJ Harvey and, Pixies and Nirvana. And there's, I mean, he was the kind of engineer, producer du jour, and I think there was, a lot for him to balance, no pun intended there. When Andris and I went into these files and started going back through them to remaster, you could start hearing, because we basically set up and recorded the album in order. And you can hear that. You can hear the sounds, not only from a production and engineering standpoint, start to get kind of weird and kind of wonky sometimes, but you can kind of hear it in the performances a little bit. This is just me being a part of it and being critical of my own stuff. I think for most people, they may or may not notice. I don't know. I can't really say actually, but it's very noticeable to me. And it was really interesting when we went back and, like I said, started dissecting them, and we're like, wow, you could really hear that like we were all getting tired, Steve included. Okay. So there was some weird little things that we had to go back and fix. The bass was non-existent on some of that stuff, and which is really ironic because that early material is like bass led, it's very much led by the bass, the way that like, Mike Watt might lead the Minutemen or something, or the way that like a James Jamerson bass line might lead Motown, or Paul McCartney's bass line might lead something from the Beatles. Like Darren played bass like that, but in this post-progressive, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it kind of way, and it was buried, So that was one of the tasks, was just trying to bring the bass up more and give it more clarity, bring it more to the forefront, how it was meant to be heard. Yeah. And, through, the technology and through, some good sets of ears, we were able to do that. I mean, the record sounds so much better than it did initially, if you have the original and you turn it up loud, it still sounds pretty good. You know, it's not like it's terrible. I mean, Steve did a good job, but it's not his best work, of course. You know, I mean, we did it in a day, and it was all pretty rushed. So it was good to be able to go back, and I think it's more representative now. You can hear more of what we were doing, and it's tighter sounding because you can hear more nuance in the drum parts, and that kind of helped frame a lot of the rhythm in the bass and the guitar too. It kind of helped tighten all that up. So I'm really proud of it. You know, my friend Andris, he's the one that has the studio where the rest of my equipment is. He and I, you know, with him, like, you know, at the helm, we did the Face of Collapse reissue as well, and that turned out really, really, really good. So I think people are going to be really happy when they get this record. It sounds awesome. I'm super happy with it, and I think the fans are going to really enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I can definitely say, having had the opportunity to listen to it already, I think it sounds awesome. So I think you did a great job with it.
Oh, great.
Now, corresponding with this new version of Dig Out the Switch, you have a new iteration of Dazzling Killmen with you and Nick together, and you're going to be playing some shows in September. So tell me the story of that side of things. How did you bring this version of Dazzling Killmen back together for these shows that are coming up?
It started a couple years ago. What is it? Dark Days, Bright Nights Festival, I believe it's called. I hope I'm getting that name right. In Richmond, Virginia, wanted to have us a couple years ago and approached Nick, and Nick brought it to us and was like, "Hey, these guys are willing to, you know, put up, you know, X amount of dollars. It's pretty decent. They would love for us to do this. Are you guys interested? I would like to do it." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm on board. Let's do that." And at that time, Nick and Darren, you know, there was either they couldn't or wouldn't, you know, it depended. I'm not really sure. So I was like, all right, well, we can't do that. That's not going to happen. The next year, the festival asks again, "Hey, we really, really love for you guys to be like, you know, one of the kind of main acts for this. Is there any chance that we can get you to do this?" You know, and Nick and I brought it up to Tim and Darren again, and it was same thing. You know, they just have other things going on that it was not going to allow enough room for Dazzling Killmen because it's a big commitment, right? So this time though, you know, Nick and I were like, "Hey, Blake and I have been talking. We want to do this. Like, would you guys mind if we tried to do it with two other people? You know, if we got another guitar player, another bass player?" And they both kind of, you know, gave us their blessing, quote unquote. So we're like, okay, let's do this. And this kind of came about because Nick and I had been talking on the phone again after kind of a hiatus. You know, since the Killmen, Nick and I have always been very close, very much like brothers. And with that, you know, it kind of ebbs and flows. And so there was a period we had come out of where we hadn't talked to each other in quite a while. And then we started rekindling our friendship over the phone, and it was like, it just felt really good, you know? So that kind of was a catalyst to like, hey, maybe we should do this. This is just fun, kind of hanging out, talking. Like, what if we actually do get the band together? These guys are wanting to put up some money for the festival. I bet we could probably get some other shows. And so it all came together pretty quickly. This would have been, you know, this past winter, basically, you know, 2024 into 2025. And by, I don't know, October, November of 2024, we kind of had the group together. Maybe it was December. I don't remember. It didn't take very long. Ben Greenberg, who plays in the New York band Uniform, he is a friend of Hank Steamers, who is a very well-known music writer and a really good old friend of ours. And Nick was telling Hank that we're going to try to do this. And Hank had relayed this to Ben because apparently when Ben was younger, maybe in his late teens or something, he discovered Face of Collapse and I think kind of became obsessed with it for a while and really learned everything about it. And so he contacted Nick out of the blue and said, "Hey, I heard from Hank that you guys are thinking about doing this. If you do, I want to be the guitar player." And Nick was like, "Whoa, like who is this guy? This is kind of awesome. Like, you know, we've got this kind of super fan that like also happens to be like in a really popular band and is this amazing engineer with this like, it was just like, wow, like, okay, cool. And so he started learning some stuff because, we had to make sure that people really could do the parts, So he started sending us little video clips of some of the more difficult passages, and we're like, okay, he can do it. So carry on. You got the job if you want it, kind of thing. And then very quickly, we got my friend Evan on board, who was a bass player up near where I live here in the Catskills. And he and I have played together a lot over the years in a number of different projects. And I knew that he would be able to do this. There's not many people that could step in and do what Darren did on the bass. Just knowing from hearing from Evan, like what his experience has been. And Evan is a monster bass player. But Darren is too. And it was kind of a real bitch learning some of that stuff. But I knew that he could do it. And the fact that he lived near me meant that we could get together whenever we wanted to rehearse more, So that was it. We had the guys on board. And then by mid to end of March 2025, we got together for the first time up here, rehearsed at Andris' studio. And it was really apparent after, just the first few minutes that like, oh, wow, this is going to work. This is actually happening. We clicked musically and personally. It all just felt good. And we had a good time, and so that kind of sealed the deal. And that's when we made the announcement.
And have you discussed, or do you think there would be a possibility of extending this iteration of the band beyond these shows, maybe doing some new material, or you view this as being very much kind of representing the music that you made before?
Well, I want to take it one step at a time. And we have definitely talked about, creating some new music possibly. Nick is really excited about that. He's the one that has really initiated a lot of that. I'm a little more apprehensive just because it's like, I'm not sure what Dazzling Killmen 2025, like as far as creating new material, what does that look and sound like? And I don't want to be tied or chained to having to be something that we think we're supposed to be, that there be some change to break for sure in that way, just sort of mentally. It could definitely be done. And we are absolutely, we're looking into, we're booking stuff into 2026, Europe, other parts of the States. There's been talk of going to South America. There seems to be some interest there. We have some people doing some work for us down there as well, as far as possibly putting together some shows. So right now it's the easiest to think that we're going to go and represent what we made 30 years ago, because that is such a great body of work. And just playing Face of Collapse alone, start to finish, which we will be doing, along with a bit of older material, is still a great show in 2025, 2026, I think. It would be awesome in a way, really, if we get to the point where we can start to initiate some new ideas to see what that might look like. I'm not dead set on it. Sometimes it makes me feel like that it should be a different group if we're going to do that, but I don't know. I think it's really just going to take us getting together, doing some improvising, working on some different little ideas that, some of us have come up with, little tidbits to work on, and just kind of see what develops organically. That would be a bit more down the road. Right now, we want to get this, this show of Face of Collapse and some older material on the road first, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in amongst the various different projects that you were involved with in the years after the initial Dazzling Killmen days, I wanted to talk a bit about your releases under your own name. So you released The Beat Fantastic last year, and I think your first release under your own name was Time's Up in 2013. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious from your point of view, with those being essentially drumming records, do you view that as being kind of like a more pure expression of your creativity, or you don't view it in that way?
I don't know if I would think of it in terms of being more pure or not. It's more just a reflection of what I do when I'm kind of left alone, left to my own devices in a way. Part of that has come from necessity of, being in between bands, being in between projects, having time when I was on my own, but still really wanted to make a record, and the idea to create sort of almost like pop-like structures, but using just drums and percussion, and not even really specifically pitched drums and percussion. I don't really play a lot of like marimbas and vibraphones and that sort of thing. I mean, I do, but not on these albums. It was more trying to create melodies out of things that are not always deemed melodic. I mean, I'm a drummer. I think drumming is all kinds of melodic. It just depends on who's playing, what the approach is. And it was a chance for me to explore what my own sort of music would be, and also to, kind of create my own drum ensemble is the way I looked at it as well. A little bit easier than trying to actually gather people. It'd be great. I've thought about it, and people have talked to me about possibly trying to recreate some of these pieces live with a group of drummers. And that's still possible. I mean, the material is it's drumming, it's rhythmic. It's not really relegated to any one specific genre or time period. So I think that even down the road, it would still be valid in some way, if I were to put it together with an actual live ensemble. But a lot of it was just, me trying to see what I could come up with when I'm just by myself, and the drums were the main tools that I had to work with. I had other instruments around, but once I started coming up with these sort of drum compositions, I was like, I just wanted to keep going with that, and see how far I could take it. It's definitely like a niche thing, but I stand behind those records 100%. Like when I sit down to listen to them, there's a definite statement there, and they're musical. I mean, it's
Definitely, yeah.
There's a number of drumming records out if you start looking, and there's been some modern ones that have come out with a few bigger drummers on them. There was one that came out that had some bigger known drummers on them, where they were all kind of playing live in the studio, and it was okay, but it's kind of hard to listen to just drums sometimes. So I wanted to make sure to make something that was like a bit catchier, something a bit more melodic.
No, I think that it's interesting, and it resonates with me somehow when you talk about the melodic aspect of it, because it's like certain tracks that I've listened to from those records, I can feel like there's I'm no like expert when it comes to drums, but it's like I hear textures and I hear different tones and I hear different resonance. And I'm just like, oh, this is really cool. Like it doesn't feel like, oh, he's just doing drum solos. It's like there's a whole kind of like yeah, it feels like they feel full. They feel like full records in terms of like the elements to them, which I think is really cool.
The textures, the timbres, the tones, the resonances, all of that is of the utmost importance when I'm doing that. That's like because I'm doing this a lot of times, like in my own little kind of studio here, I can take as much time as I need just to get that one drum sound just right. I don't have a lot of equipment, so I utilize simple techniques. I use, gain stages, mic placement, tunings. There's not a lot of processing. Like the drum sounds that you hear on my records, that's how they were going down to tape, quote unquote, if you will, or to disc. I don't just record drums and then do all this outboard processing afterward. All of that thought about, wow, I need this snare drum to sound this certain way. I've got to tune it a certain way. I've got to use the dampening a certain way. How much, how little dampening am I going to have? And then what mic am I going to use? Where am I going to put the mic? And what's the gain stage going to be like? That's huge. I mean, those elements right there, if you can really, because I'm kind of almost limited to those elements, I play with them in a lot more detail than a lot of other folks do that may have access to more equipment. Because it has to be like, I want to put people inside of those drums as much as possible. And I want to bring out for maybe a less experienced ear, how I hear these drums, the detail in which I hear them, like, and I try to convey that by kind of magnifying some of these overtones and things that make it lost in the background sometimes.
Yeah. No, it's very cool. And another thing I wanted to touch on, like sort of reflecting this obviously deep interest and understanding you have of rhythm and of the instrument and or these instruments, is your book, the Book of Rhythm. So tell me a bit about how that came about.
So I started that. I mean, I started writing a book a few times. I had been wanting to write some sort of drum book, since I was probably in my 20s. And I would always start and then get kind of overwhelmed and stop. And I believe it was in the fall of 2017. I was talking with one of my students, and he just kind of offhandedly said, "Man, you should write a book," which was not a new idea for me. But for whatever reason, at that moment, that statement of his really resonated and stuck. And I went home that night, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write a book this time. I'm just going to do it. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to start. So I got a notebook and I just started writing anything, stream of consciousness, it could be words, could be rhythms, whatever came to mind, I got to get going with something. A lot of this had to do with me trying to deal with the first Trump presidency also, because of all the frustration and anger and disappointment that I had by everything that was going down, and just, without getting into all that, I needed some sort of outlet, something I could really put my focus and energy into, like a big project. I didn't start off writing the Book of Rhythm initially. I didn't know I was going to write this kind of like encyclopedia of rhythm. I thought I was going to kind of write like the Blake Fleming method, how I developed my style from A to Z kind of thing, right? With, exercises mixed with anecdotes and stuff, kind of do it that way. A slight bit of memoir, slight bit of, drum, instruction, kind of mixture of things. And I still might do that eventually, but I started just thinking of groups of rhythm. Like, okay, if you got 3 notes, how many different ways can I shuffle those around between the notes and the rests? I was like, oh, okay. And then what if I have 4 notes? It does this, it adds that many more. And then what if I have 5? And I started looking at it mathematically. And then I discovered, actually, I think it might have been my wife who discovered for me a mathematical formula dealing with combinations and permutations. And what it would do is it would tell you, like, if you have so many things in your set, you could calculate, like, well, if I only take 2 of those 4, how many different combinations do I come up with using those 2 notes out of the 4 kind of thing, right? I found an actual formula for it. And it started to look really interesting to me. Beforehand, I was doing this manually, writing it all out in a notebook. I had not had a formula to work with. I was doing it just like by eye. And what would happen was I would have, say, like some of these rhythm sets, as you get more notes that you're trying to, work with, like, when you've got 3 beats or 3 notes, you've got 6 combinations. When you have 4, you've got 14. When you have 5, you've got 30, and it keeps growing from there. If you add a beat, it doubles the amount, and you add 2. Like, again, for 3 beats, you got 6, but for 4 beats, you got 14. That's 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 2 gets you 14. We got 14 rhythms in 4. If I want to do it in 5, there's 30. Now, this is all according to the formula. And then when I started writing it all out, I was like, oh, I was able to see this, how it worked formulaically. I feel like I'm getting into a really long, arduous answer here that I haven't talked about my book in a while in this way, so I'm a little rusty on it. But I discovered this system of patterning that I developed manually initially. And then I found this equation that would tell me at least the number of possibilities in a set. Now I had to figure out how to chart those possibilities out, but I knew what the goal was. That helped me tremendously. Once I figured out the pattern, I basically developed my own algorithm, my own system of patterning. Once I figured that out, it took me probably 6 weeks. It's like turning a faucet on. I could pattern out in mathematical order any number of beats. It did not matter. The reason that I did the numbers that I chose, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12, is because you could basically create any time signature out of those combinations already. Just the 12 beat combinations alone, there are 4,094 basic rhythms.
Wow.
And they're all written out in exact mathematical order. I started writing this out by hand and over the course of 2 notebooks in the fall and winter of 2017. Worked on it the whole year of 2018. By February 2019, I have the book in hand. It was like 14 months of like 8 to 10 hours a day, nothing else. Seeing it in my sleep, dreaming about it. I was experimenting in various ways here, here. And I was opening up to ways of seeing. And that came to me, and it's like, if no one else buys this, I'm making this book for myself, because this is my desert island book, deserted island book, whatever you want to call it, because it's a lifetime of study. If you know how to look at that material, and I tell people how to look at the material and the introduction to it, how to see it, it's endless. It's absolutely endless. And it is for any and all instruments. It took me a year and a half to do the whole thing, and then I promoted it for another year and a half. I burnt myself out big time. I need to make more videos for it, because like I still randomly sell books and I don't do anything for it. It's been sold in 22 countries. But if I actually put a really strong concerted effort into it, I know I could sell a lot more still, because it's a universal thing. It's not trendy. It's not the information is not going to go out of style. It is universal information that I corral, put into order. And it's kind of crazy, because I was the only person that I've seen that did this. Like this, it's literally historical that no one has ever done that before. Like this archive of information did not exist until I did it. And that is like a weird thing to say, but like I still say it, motherfuckers, because God damn it, I did that.
If it's true, then it's worth saying.
Yeah, because it's absolutely true, so.
Now, a lot of the people that I interview a lot of, I'm particularly fascinated with people in sort of DIY, underground, avant-garde music making circles. And a lot of the people that I speak to essentially don't have like a career making this kind of music. They'll have some other jobs, whether it's like, I was interviewing the guitarist from Car Bomb, and he was talking about how they basically, all of the band work in tech, and then they make this bizarre experimental music separately. And I do talk to people that have found a way to, whether it's having a career in the music they're making or within the musical world. I'm curious how that is for you, and how that's been over the years in terms of, like the passion of music versus the career.
Yeah. I was an adjunct at a college. So I had like a part-time college job for like 16 years that I got health insurance from for my family. And it was just not a lot of money by any means, because it was an adjunct, but it was steady money. I don't do that anymore. Before I did that job, I worked for myself as a musician. And then now for the last, 2.5 years, all I do is work for myself. As a musician, I have, as an independent, sort of more avant-garde leaning, non-commercial musician, that's really kind of what I am. I have 6 or 7 different ways that I make money utilizing music. I've always taught. Like I teach private drum lessons. That ebbs and flows. Sometimes I have a decent number of students. Sometimes I don't have so many, but I always have some students that I teach. I teach online. I've been teaching online for 13 years now. I can teach people all over the world, and I have. I sell my book. I play gigs. I play on people's records. I do studio work out of my house and in other studios. I have an online vintage record store. So I have a Discogs store, and I sell records through Discogs, eBay, and sometimes just person to person, point to point sales. That can be really good too, because I specialize in rare first presses. The first Velvet Underground record is one of my specialties. That's one of my very favorite records, and I have I have like a basically near mint copy in my collection at the moment that is for sale, and it's like a $3,500 record, And then let's see, I think that's, I can't remember if I mentioned everything. I sell my book too. That I still have book sales. There's some digital media. There's some digital sales from like Bandcamp and stuff. I still get small, but like I get a few $100, couple $100 depending from SKiN GRAFT usually every year for digital stuff, t-shirt sales, that kind of thing. I'm going to start touring is now the new thing with the Dazzling Killmen stuff, starting to do more out of town shows. So that's another stream. So that's how I cobble it all together. I get really frustrated sometimes, and then I also consider myself very, very lucky, and I'm full of gratitude other times. It depends on the day, but I'm very lucky that I get to do really what I love to do, and that I have, like an amazing family. Like my wife and son are. I mean, they're just the best. I don't even want to start because I'll start crying, but like I have just like an amazing support system, and they want me to do this because this is what I do and this is what I'm best at. I just taught a drum camp last week, and that was like a djembe camp. I had like 13 kids. I had some 6 and 7 year olds. I had some 9-year-olds, some 10-year-olds, and a couple 12-year-olds. So I've got this like Brazilian bossa nova group that I play with quite a bit. That's really, really fun, really cool. The drumming is really cool and awesome. I only play brushes in that group. So. Anyway, all of these things allow me to make a living as an artist and a musician.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting insight. Like in my own slightly different way, I essentially work for myself, and I can recognize like, yeah, there are totally pros and cons to it. Like there's a lack of security for sure, but there's flexibility, and a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm really passionate about. And so like, yeah, there's definitely plenty to be grateful for.
Yeah.
Now I guess you've covered a lot in terms of what you've got going on at the moment. I guess something we haven't mentioned specifically is you've got your blakethedrummer.com website.
Yeah.
Obviously,
needs to be updated a little bit. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Obviously, we've mentioned Dig Out the Switch is coming out on the 12th of September. You've got your shows coming up starting in September, and you've mentioned the fact that there's going to be more in the coming months and into next year.
Yeah.
We've mentioned the book. There's your recent solo records. I guess whether people go to Bandcamp or whether they go to your website, they can get the necessary links there. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you've got going on at the moment that you'd like to mention or promote?
There's a pretty cool project that I'm a part of with a number of other kind of, known indie and sort of rock drummers. So the project is called Drum Corpse, like a corpse, but on play on the word drum corps, right? Okay. It's David Silver from the band Season to Risk. It's a protest album that's coming out, actually. It's got me, it's got like Greg from Deerhoof on it. It's got Cliff, who used to be in the Flaming Lips, like, for a long time. Matt Chamberlain, like the Matt Chamberlain, who's like the Hal Blaine of our fucking generation, he's going to be on it. Chris Enriquez, Kelly Scott, a number of well-known and liked, like I said, Indian rock drummers. And the project is David recorded a simple tribal drum beat to go along with a popular pro-democracy, typically, anti-Trump sort of chant, okay? No kings, right? Hands off our democracy, things like that. And so you'd have this chant as a loop, you'd have a simple tribal drum pattern, and then he would have us other drummers play it kind of almost like a lead part on top of it sometimes, like to play with it sometimes, but then also to kind of play like a lead part, not to solo necessarily, to keep a groove and to keep it going in the chant, but to kind of have a more melodic rhythmic interjection, right? And so it's a really cool project. And so I recorded for that. And the idea is that we've got these longer versions of what we've done that are like 20 minutes each, and they're to be played over massive PA systems, which they have been during these protests that we're having, specifically against the current administration and, the dictatorship that is trying to unfold here, essentially. It's coming out as a vinyl LP, and on the vinyl LP are the actual pieces that we created. So I created an actual like 4 or 5 minute piece that goes along with David's. That'd be my track. And then what they did for the actual live protest is they created more like 15 to 20 minute pieces out of those. And he's doing this with the guy who's engineering it. I can't find it at the moment. Anyway, there's a well-known engineer that's working on the project as well. There's a Bandcamp page for it. You can check out the longer version of my piece and Greg's piece are up there. I believe the Bandcamp it's drumcorpse.bandcamp.com, I believe. But that's a really cool piece because it's unique. It's starting to get a little bit of press, and it brought an interesting group of drummers together for a cause that is, overtly political, unfortunately, but necessary. Yeah, hands off our democracy is essentially, where it's coming from. So that's been something I've been doing as well, and again, playing with that with my Brazilian group.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. That sounds like a very worthy cause. I'm curious. The bass player, was that George Porter Jr.?
No, that he's from the Meters.
John Evans? Yeah,
John Evans. Thank you. Yeah. So he has been doing a lot of the recording and mixing for the record, and is doing a really good job. What I've heard so far sounded great, and he's been running a Kickstarter. David Siller has for the album, and he makes it sound like it's coming out sometime pretty soon. Like it's probably this fall that the actual vinyl's coming out. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Well, Blake, we managed to cover quite a lot, in fact, as it turns out. So it was great to have your time. Thank you so much. It was really fascinating for me to talk with you. I enjoyed it a lot.
My pleasure, Tom.
Yeah. So all the best with the release of the remastered Dig Out the Switch, and I hope that you have some great shows. And hopefully I'll get a chance to see you guys playing when you come through to my part of the world.
Yeah. Where are you?
I'm Glasgow in Scotland, but sometimes in England as well.
Okay. I couldn't remember. So you're in Glasgow at the moment?
At this very moment, I'm in Oxford visiting my mum, but usually I'm in Glasgow.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Thank you very much, sir. Until next time, all the best.
Thanks, Tom. Pleasure.
too close.